Spring's the ideal time to think about taking delphinium cuttings. You get nice fresh green shoots pushing through the ground that are just ready for taking. Now there are two ways you can take them. And the second one might surprise you. It's so simple you don't need any specialist equipment or tools to do it. It should be pointed out at this stage that you should always wear gloves and wash your hands immediately that you finish working with delphiniums, because they do contain certain toxins that could cause skin reactions or allergic reactions. They are rightly called the queen of the summer borders because their height and their colour range, especially through the light and dark blues, add a touch of cool, elegant sophistication wherever they are grown. Another member of the Delphinium family, and they look very similar, is the Aconitum, otherwise known as monkshood, which is particularly toxic, so it's best if you have pets or children to keep those plants out of the garden. Now here you can see one of the plants I have put up a particularly vigorous shoot this season, so I'll just cut it off near enough at ground level because there are lots of crown buds underneath that will push up shoots for the rest of the summer, and that will make a lovely cutting. Now the thing is to get it to the potting shed as quickly as possible before it has a chance to dry out. Trying to keep plastic out of the garden, I have now switched over to using biodegradable vegetable waste bags, the caddy bags that you get with the local authority. And the very first job is to inspect the cutting to see if there's anything that we may have missed in our excitement, pests, diseases, or any damaged areas. And as with any cutting, the first thing you do is to strip off all of the lower leaves for any little sort of bits and pieces that are left around there. The reason is to reduce the opportunity for water to be lost through the leaf surface. So you try and just leave a little sort of fuzz at the top just to push the plants along. And there's always one that you miss, and just take them off. And as you can see, that cutting is ready now to be used. And the first thing we do is put it back in the bag. But it won't be long before we actually take the cutting. Now we're moving on to the medium to growing it in, and I like to use a John in the space or a soil-based seed and cutting compost because it has virtually no nutrients in it, and silver sand. And I keep a little bit of silver sand back, and you'll see why in a moment. But the most important thing to do is to mix them together, and I don't add any extra water at this stage because the sand itself is quite moist, so just get them thoroughly mixed and ready to go. And by mixing it as well, you also get light and air into the compost, which makes it warmer and easier to use. And I use clays because clays breathe, and they will allow the cutting to keep cool. It doesn't stress it, because the most important thing that you have to do with these cuttings, and I must stress this, is to keep them cool. They don't require any heat at all. They've got no roots. You don't want to put them under any undue strain. Now, once the pot is filled, I always like to put a little skim of silver sand that we saved from before across the surface, and this will help when you push the cutting through that layer. It'll scratch or rough up the edge of the cutting and the base of it, and you'll push a little bit of silver sand to the bottom of the hole as well, and that will help the roots to develop. I like to use a gel as opposed to a powder. As I say, this cutting has got quite a sharp, clean finish on the end of it, and it just needs dipping in. And only dip the tip, the very tip, or the cut surface of the cutting into the compost. You don't want to enter the rooting medium. You don't want to use too much. And here we go. Now that should be soft enough for us to just gently push it in. The cutting's quite strong, and you need to put about just under half, a third to just under half into the compost itself, and that's all we need to do to take it through to the rooting period. Now there's only one more thing left to do before we put the cutting by to root, and that's just gently water it in the surface, and this more or less is to push the water into all the air spaces within the compost itself and make sure there's a good contact between the compost and the cutting itself. And that watering should be enough to take it through a week or so. Don't water for the sake of it, and just make sure it stays damp by giving it a gentle misting every day, every other day. It all depends on how warm the day is itself, and hopefully within a couple of weeks you'll have some roots to show for all your efforts. The second method I'm going to show you is taking Smaller, so still springtime cuttings. They're slightly more fleshy, a little bit more green, but once again, it's cut just below soil level, leaving some crown buds on the main plant and having a couple at the base of the cuttings themselves. And get them into a bag and get them back into the potting shed as quickly as possible. And it really couldn't be easier. Once you get the cuttings out of the bag, check them over, looking for any signs of pests, diseases, or damage at all. And you need to make them finish length, which is about 10 centimeters, 4 inches long. Because all we're going to do is take a tiny sliver off the end of these, and it's the same as before. Peel the leaves away to reduce the moisture loss, not to put the cuttings under any stress. And just gently pull them back, and as you can see, and you end up with something which is a little bit like a very skinny shuttlecock. And as you can see, we've only taken 3 cuttings here, so when you go over each of the delphinium plants, you wouldn't take too many, possibly 3 at the most, because you may only need 1. I find it's better to take spring cuttings, one because they're young healthy shoots and they will root a little bit more quickly, but it does give you a reasonable plant by the end of summer that you can either overwinter in a pot, or if you want to plant it out in the garden, then it's going to be big enough and strong enough to survive the winter time. The problem we have with delphiniums is if it's a very, very wet season, then they do suffer from a crown rot, and you may find that the middle of the plant just dies away and the plant will follow. So the thing that you have to try and do is that every 2 to 3 years is just freshen up your stock just to keep a substitute plant there in case you do lose it. And now we're preparing the bottom of the cutting, and it's just really just a sliver to tidy it up. And you should use it against a wood block, but as I say, old habits die hard, and I'm used to doing it this way. And all you're really doing is exposing fresh tissue that you will root quite easily for you. And there you are, you can see we've almost finished them now, one last cutting to do. And if you look at them, you can see there's 2, 3 leaves there maximum. And for the system that we're going to use, we don't need any rooting hormone and we don't need any rooting compost. The rooting medium that we're going to use becomes as a bit of a surprise to you, though I have used this system before. And what you need is a glass jar, and then we have the special rooting medium which comes free. All you need is a watering can, and you put about 25 ml, an inch of water, just ordinary plain water, at the bottom of the jar, and then without any further fussing, just pop the cuttings in, ensuring that the main bulk of the root area, not so much the leaf base but the root area, is in underwater. If you get the leaves underwater, they may rot, so just take care to make sure that they're sticking up, and that's it. Just put it somewhere shady, because don't forget there's no roots on these plants at the moment. Mist them over from time to time just to keep the leaves nice and fresh. It varies with the temperature. If the weather's very warm, very dry, then you may find yourself doing it twice a day. But don't be afraid, as I say, don't be afraid to change your water if it looks as if it's getting a little bit cloudy. And here you can see the 2 systems. The slightly more woody cutting is going into a pot, and the tender ones that we're using, we've got them in the jar. I would use the shorter cuttings in compost if you were taking the cuttings during the autumn time. It's much better. But as I say, it's just a fun way. You can do it if you haven't got a greenhouse. You can pop them in a sort of cool room. Don't get them too warm. Don't stress them. And the thing with delphiniums is that they produce massive foliage, all hollow stems, which starts to rot off. So cut them down when they finish flowering. Give them a little feed and they'll pick up, and they'll may, if the weather's fine, nice and warm, produce some shoots you can use. And with a bit of luck, you'll have something to look forward to in the future. Diolch, and thank you for watching. Goodbye for now, but if you would like to see any more, please hit the subscribe and like buttons.